The dust cloud rose behind the wagon like a ghost trying to catch up with the living. And Martha Dalton knew she should have listened to her father when he told her never to travel alone through the high desert country of southern Colorado in the summer of 1883. She was 22 years old and had inherited her mother's stubborn streak along with her auburn hair and green eyes, and she had convinced herself that the shortcut through the rocky terrain would save her half a day's journey to Alamosa, where her aunt lay sick with fever. The wagon wheel hit another rut, and Martha gripped the reins tighter, urging the two horses forward even as the afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on her bonnet-covered head. She had been traveling since dawn, and the landscape stretched endlessly in every direction, dotted with scrub brush and the occasional juniper tree that offered no shade worth stopping for. The horses whinnied nervously as they approached a cluster of rocks, and Martha felt her skin prickle with the same unease. She had heard stories about rattlesnakes sunning themselves on the warm stones, but she had never encountered one herself. Her father had taught her to be cautious, to watch where she stepped, but out here in the wagon she felt relatively safe. That sense of security shattered when the left rear wheel struck a jagged boulder hidden beneath the sand, and the sickening crack of splitting wood echoed across the empty land. The wagon lurched violently to one side, and Martha was thrown from her seat, tumbling through the air before landing hard on her back among the rocks. The breath left her lungs in a painful whoosh, and for several seconds she could only stare up at the brilliant blue sky while spots danced across her vision. The horses had bolted forward a few yards before stopping, still attached to the damaged wagon. Martha sat up slowly, testing her limbs for breaks or serious injury. Her left arm was scraped and bleeding, and her ribs ached from the impact, but nothing seemed broken. She pulled herself to her feet, swaying slightly as a wave of dizziness washed over her. The wagon was tilted at an awkward angle, the broken wheel making it impossible to continue. She was at least 15 miles from Alamosa, maybe more, with no other settlements within reasonable walking distance. Martha took a deep breath and began to assess her situation. She would need to unhitch the horses and ride one bareback to the nearest town for help. The thought of abandoning the wagon and her aunt's medicine worried her, but she had no choice. She took a step toward the horses and felt something brush against her ankle just above her boot. The sound came a split second later, that distinctive rattle that every person who lived in these parts knew to fear. She looked down and saw the thick, coiled body of a rattlesnake, its diamond-patterned scales catching the sunlight, its triangular head already pulling back from where it had struck. The pain came immediately, a burning sensation that radiated up her leg from two small puncture wounds just above her left ankle. Martha stumbled backward, her heart hammering in her chest as the snake slithered away between the rocks. She had been bitten. She was alone, miles from any help, and she had been bitten by a rattlesnake. Her hands shook as she lowered herself to the ground, knowing that panic would only make the venom spread faster through her bloodstream. She had seen a man die from a rattlesnake bite when she was 14 years old, watched him convulse and foam at the mouth while the doctor tried desperately to save him. The memory made her stomach turn. She pulled off her bonnet and used it to fan her face, trying to stay calm as she examined the wound. The puncture marks were clear and already beginning to swell. She needed to slow the spread of venom, needed to get help, but the nearest town was so far away and she was already feeling the first effects of the poison. Her leg throbbed with pain, and she could feel her pulse racing. Martha tore a strip from her petticoat and tied it tightly above the bite, hoping to slow the venom's progress through her body. It was a temporary measure at best, and she knew it. The sound of hoofbeats reached her ears, faint at first but growing louder. Martha looked up, shielding her eyes from the sun, and saw a rider approaching from the east. Hope surged through her chest even as another wave of pain coursed through her leg. The rider drew closer, and she could make out more details. A man on a gray horse, wearing a dusty brown hat and a dark vest over a sweat-stained shirt. He sat tall in the saddle with the easy confidence of someone who had spent his entire life on horseback. Ethan Walsh had been tracking a lost calf for the better part of 3 hours when he spotted the tilted wagon and the woman sitting on the ground beside it. At 26 years old, he had worked as a ranch hand and cowboy since he was barely old enough to stay on a horse, and he knew trouble when he saw it. He urged his mount into a faster gallop, covering the distance quickly. As he drew near, he could see that the woman was young and clearly in distress, her face pale and her hands pressed against her leg. He dismounted before his horse had fully stopped, dropping to one knee beside her. His eyes were a striking shade of gray, and his face was weathered from years of sun and wind, with a strong jaw darkened by several days' worth of stubble. What happened? His voice was deep and steady, the kind of voice that inspired confidence. "Rattlesnake," Martha managed to say, her voice tight with pain. "Bit me maybe 5 minutes ago. I was thrown from the wagon and I did not see it until it was too late." Ethan's expression hardened as he looked at the makeshift tourniquet she had tied above the wound. "Let me see." He gently moved her hands aside and examined the bite. The swelling was already pronounced, and the skin around the puncture marks had taken on an angry red color. He had seen rattlesnake bites before, had even been struck once himself when he was younger, though the snake had barely grazed him. This was a full bite, and the amount of venom injected would determine whether this woman lived or died. "What's your name?" he asked, already pulling his knife from his belt. "Martha Dalton," she said, watching him with wide eyes. "What are you doing?" "I'm Ethan Walsh, and I'm going to try to help you." He did not waste time explaining further. He cut away the fabric of her dress around the bite, exposing the swollen flesh. "This is going to hurt, but I need you to trust me." He made 2 small incisions across each puncture wound, just deep enough to allow the venom to flow more freely. Martha bit back a cry of pain, her hands clenching into fists. Ethan lowered his mouth to the wound without hesitation and began to suck the venom from the bite. He sucked hard, then spat the contaminated blood and poison onto the ground. He repeated the process several times, his jaw working methodically as he drew out as much of the venom as he could. The taste was bitter and metallic, but he ignored it, focusing entirely on the task at hand. Martha watched him through a haze of pain and disbelief. She had heard of people sucking venom from snake bites, but she had always thought it was something from dime novels and tall tales. After several minutes, Ethan sat back and wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "That's all I can do here. We need to get you to a doctor fast." He looked at her damaged wagon and the nervous horses. "Can you ride?" "I think so," Martha said, though in truth she was not sure. Her leg felt like it was on fire, and waves of nausea were starting to wash over her. The venom was still in her system, still spreading despite Ethan's efforts. "Alamosa is the closest town with a doctor," Ethan said. "About 15 miles northeast. My horse can carry us both if we do not push too hard, but we need to leave now." He scooped Martha up in his arms as if she weighed nothing, and she felt the solid strength of his chest against her side. He lifted her onto his horse and then swung up behind her, one arm wrapping around her waist to hold her steady. "Hold on to the saddle horn. If you feel like you are going to fall, tell me." Martha gripped the horn with both hands as Ethan urged the gray horse into a steady lope. The movement jarred her injured leg, and she had to bite her lip to keep from crying out. Ethan felt her tense against him and he tightened his hold, keeping her secure in the saddle. "Talk to me," he said close to her ear. "Tell me about yourself. It will help keep you conscious." "I was going to see my aunt," Martha said, her words coming out slightly slurred. "She is sick in Alamosa. My father did not want me to go alone, but I insisted. I thought I could take the shortcut and save time." She let out a bitter laugh. "That worked out well. You could not have known," Ethan said. His voice was calm and reassuring, a stark contrast to the urgency with which he was pushing his horse forward. "I've been riding these trails for 10 years, and I have had close calls with rattlers more times than I can count. They are unpredictable." "You saved my life," Martha said softly. "Sucking the venom like that. I have heard of it but never seen it done." "We are not out of danger yet," Ethan replied, though his tone had gentled. "There is still venom in your system and you need proper medical care, but I got out what I could and that might make all the difference." They rode in silence for a while, the only sounds being the steady rhythm of hoofbeats and the creaking of leather. Martha felt herself growing weaker, the edges of her vision starting to blur. Her head lolled back against Ethan's shoulder, and she felt his arm tighten around her. "Stay with me, Martha," he said firmly. "Keep talking. Tell me about your family." "My father owns a mercantile in Del Norte," she managed to say. "My mother died when I was 16. It has been just him and me since then. He depends on me to help with the store." Her words were becoming harder to form, her tongue feeling thick in her mouth. "I cannot die. He would be alone." "You are not going to die," Ethan said with such conviction that Martha almost believed him. "I am not going to let that happen. Just stay awake. Keep your eyes open." But it was becoming increasingly difficult. The world seemed to tilt and sway around her, and the pain in her leg had spread to a dull ache throughout her entire body. She could feel her heartbeat pounding in her ears, irregular and fast. Ethan noticed her growing limpness and urged his horse faster, pushing the animal harder than he would have liked. The gray responded gamely, stretching out into a ground-eating gallop despite carrying double weight. The sun was beginning to sink toward the western horizon when the buildings of Alamosa finally came into view. The town had grown considerably in recent years thanks to the railroad, and its main street bustled with activity, even in the early evening. Ethan did not slow as he thundered into town, scattering pedestrians and earning shouts of alarm. "Where is the doctor?" he bellowed at a man standing outside the saloon. "Doc Henderson, 3 buildings down on the left," the man shouted back, pointing. Ethan reined in his lathered horse in front of a modest wooden building with a painted sign that read, "Henderson Medical Practice." He dismounted and pulled Martha down into his arms, her head lolling against his shoulder. He kicked the door open and strode inside, finding himself in a small waiting room. "Doctor," he shouted. "I need a doctor now." A door opened, and a middle-aged man with graying hair and spectacles emerged, his expression shifting from annoyance to concern as he saw Martha's pale face and the swollen, discolored leg. "Rattlesnake?" he asked tersely. "Yes, about 2 hours ago," Ethan said. "I sucked out what venom I could and got her here as fast as possible." "Bring her back here," Dr. Henderson said, leading the way to an examination room. Ethan laid Martha on the table and stepped back, though he did not leave the room. The doctor worked quickly, examining the bite and checking her vital signs. "Her pulse is rapid and her breathing is shallow. You did the right thing sucking the venom, though most doctors will tell you it is not effective. In my experience, every little bit helps." He began preparing a syringe. "I am going to give her a dose of whiskey and laudanum for the pain, and we will monitor her through the night. The next 12 hours are critical." Ethan watched as the doctor administered the medication, and began cleaning and bandaging the wound properly. Martha's eyes fluttered open briefly, and she looked at him with unfocused confusion. "Ethan," she whispered. "I am right here," he said, moving closer so she could see him. "You are going to be fine. The doctor is taking care of you. Do not leave," she said, her hand reaching out weakly. Without thinking, Ethan took her hand in his, feeling how cold her fingers were. "I am not going anywhere," he promised. Dr. Henderson looked up at Ethan with an appraising expression. "Are you family?" "No, sir. I just happened to come across her when she was bitten. But I gave her my word I would stay." The doctor nodded slowly. "She is lucky you found her when you did. Another hour and I do not know if I could have done anything for her. As it is, she has a fighting chance." He finished bandaging the leg and covered Martha with a blanket. "There is a chair in the corner. Make yourself comfortable. It is going to be a long night." Ethan pulled the chair closer to the examination table and sat down, still holding Martha's hand. She had slipped into unconsciousness, her breathing shallow but steady. Dr. Henderson checked on her periodically throughout the evening, monitoring her temperature and pulse, adjusting the dosage of medication as needed. Ethan did not sleep. He sat vigilant in that chair, watching the rise and fall of Martha's chest, listening to every breath she took. He had never met this woman before today, but he felt an inexplicable connection to her, as if fate had placed him on that particular stretch of desert at exactly the right moment to save her life. As the night wore on, Ethan found himself studying her face in the lamplight. Even pale and drawn with pain, she was beautiful. Her auburn hair had come loose from its pins and spread across the pillow like silk, and her features had a delicate strength to them. He thought about how she had tried to keep her composure even when faced with a potentially fatal snakebite, how she had tied that makeshift tourniquet herself, despite the pain and fear she must have been feeling. This was not a fragile woman, despite appearances. This was someone with courage and determination. By dawn, Martha's fever had broken and her breathing had evened out. Dr. Henderson examined her thoroughly and declared that the worst had passed. "She is going to live," he told Ethan with a tired smile. "The swelling should go down over the next few days, and she will need to stay off that leg for at least a week, but she is going to make a full recovery." Ethan felt a wave of relief so powerful it nearly knocked him from his chair. He realized he was still holding Martha's hand and had been for hours. "Thank God," he said quietly. Martha opened her eyes slowly, blinking against the morning sunlight streaming through the window. "Ethan." Her voice was hoarse but stronger than it had been the night before. "Right here," he said, leaning forward. "How do you feel?" "Like I was kicked by a mule," she admitted, managing a weak smile. "But alive, thanks to you." "You are a fighter," Ethan said. "You did half the work yourself." Over the next few days, Martha remained under Dr. Henderson's care, while Ethan took care of practical matters. He rode back out to retrieve what he could from her damaged wagon, bringing her belongings to the boarding house where the doctor had arranged for her to stay during her recovery. He sent word to her father in Del Norte, assuring him that Martha was safe and being well cared for. He checked on her aunt and discovered that the older woman's fever had broken 2 days earlier, and she was recovering nicely. He reported all of this to Martha during his daily visits to her room at the boarding house. Martha found herself looking forward to those visits with an anticipation that surprised her. Ethan would arrive each afternoon after finishing his work at a local ranch where he had taken temporary employment, and they would talk for hours. She learned that he had grown up in Texas, the youngest of 4 brothers, and had come to Colorado 5 years earlier looking for work and adventure. He was quiet and thoughtful, with a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard and made her laugh. He told her about the places he had been, the cattle drives he had worked, the characters he had met along the way. In turn, Martha shared stories of her life in Del Norte, of running the mercantile with her father, of her dreams of maybe opening a dress shop someday, though she knew it was impractical. She told him about her mother, who had been a school teacher and had insisted that Martha receive a proper education. She confessed her guilt about arguing with her father before leaving, about insisting she could handle the journey alone. "He will understand," Ethan assured her. "Parents worry. It is what they do, but you are safe, and that is what matters." "Because of you," Martha said, meeting his eyes. "I owe you my life, Ethan Walsh." "You do not owe me anything," he replied, but there was something in his expression that made Martha's breath catch. Something warm and intense that had nothing to do with gratitude. By the end of the week, Martha was able to walk with the aid of a cane, and Dr. Henderson pronounced her well enough to travel home if she took it slow. Her father had sent word that he would arrive the following day to collect her. The news should have made Martha happy, but instead she felt a strange melancholy. Going home meant leaving Alamosa, and leaving Alamosa meant saying goodbye to Ethan. On her last evening in town, Ethan took her for a careful walk down Main Street. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and the air had cooled to a pleasant temperature. They walked slowly, Martha leaning lightly on her cane while Ethan stayed close beside her, ready to offer support if needed. "Your father will be glad to have you home," Ethan said as they paused outside the general store. "Yes," Martha agreed, though her tone lacked enthusiasm. "And I will be glad to see him, but I will miss this place." She paused, then added quietly, "I will miss you." Ethan stopped walking and turned to face her. In the fading light, his gray eyes looked almost silver. "I will miss you too, Martha. More than I probably should, considering we have only known each other a week." "It feels like longer," Martha said. "Like I have known you for years. Is that strange?" "No," Ethan replied. "I feel the same way." He hesitated, then reached out and took her hand, the same way he had held it that first night in the doctor's office. "Martha, I know this is fast, and I know we come from different places, but I cannot let you leave without telling you what I feel. You have gotten under my skin in a way I cannot explain. When I think about you going back to Del Norte and me going back to drifting from ranch to ranch, it makes my chest hurt." Martha felt tears prick her eyes, but they were not tears of sadness. "What are you saying, Ethan?" "I am saying I want to court you properly. I am saying I want the chance to see if what I feel right now is real or just the result of extraordinary circumstances. I am saying that I think I could fall in love with you if you give me the chance." The words came out in a rush, as if he had been holding them back and they could no longer be contained. "You do not have to wait for the chance," Martha said softly, squeezing his hand. "I already have fallen for you. I did not mean to. I did not expect to. But somewhere between you saving my life and you sitting by my bedside all night and you making me laugh when I felt miserable, it happened. I fell in love with you, Ethan Walsh." Ethan made a sound that was half laugh, half exhale of relief. He cupped her face in his hands, his calloused thumbs brushing against her cheeks. "I am going to kiss you now if that is all right." "I wish you would," Martha whispered. He kissed her softly at first, tentatively, as if she were something precious that might break. But Martha leaned into him, her free hand coming up to grip his shirt, and the kiss deepened into something passionate and real. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard and Martha was smiling so wide her face hurt. "What do we do now?" she asked. "My father expects me home." "You have work here." "I will quit the job here," Ethan said immediately. "I will come to Del Norte. I can find work anywhere. I will talk to your father, ask his permission to court you properly. If he says no, I will wait until he says yes. If he still says no, I will wait until you are tired of waiting and run away with me." The last part was said with a grin, but Martha could hear the sincerity beneath the humor. "My father is a reasonable man," Martha said. "Stubborn but reasonable, especially once I tell him you saved my life. He will want to thank you, and once he gets to know you, he will see what I see." "And what do you see?" Ethan asked, genuinely curious. "I see a man who risked himself to help a stranger. I see someone kind and brave and funny and real. I see the man I want to spend my life with if he will have me." Ethan kissed her again, longer this time, pouring everything he felt into it. When they finally made their way back to the boarding house, they were both grinning like fools, hand in hand, already making plans. Martha's father, Thomas Dalton, arrived the next morning as promised. He was a tall, sturdy man in his 50s with Martha's same green eyes and a weathered face that spoke of years of hard work. His relief at seeing his daughter safe and recovering was palpable, and he embraced her tightly before turning his attention to the young man standing respectfully nearby. "You must be Ethan Walsh," Thomas said, extending his hand. "My daughter's telegram mentioned you. I understand I owe you a considerable debt." Ethan shook his hand firmly. "Any man would have done the same, sir. I just happened to be in the right place." "Not just any man would have sucked the venom from a rattlesnake bite," Thomas replied. "That took courage, and it saved my daughter's life." "I am grateful to you, Mr. Walsh. Please call me Ethan, and I am glad I could help." He glanced at Martha, who was watching the exchange with barely concealed nervousness. "Sir, I was hoping I might speak with you privately before you leave town. There is something I would like to discuss." Thomas raised an eyebrow and looked between Ethan and his daughter, clearly noting the way they kept glancing at each other. A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "I think I can guess what this is about. But yes, we can talk." "Martha, why do you not finish packing your things while Mr. Walsh and I have a conversation?" Martha nodded, though she looked worried. Ethan gave her a reassuring smile as she limped into the boarding house. Once she was out of earshot, Thomas turned to Ethan with an appraising look. "My daughter is my whole world," he said bluntly. "Her mother died 7 years ago, and it has been just Martha and me since then. She is smart, stubborn, and too independent for her own good sometimes, as this recent adventure demonstrates. But she has a good heart, and I want her to be happy." "I understand, sir," Ethan said. "And I want the same thing. I know we have only known each other a short time, but I have fallen in love with your daughter. I would like your permission to court her properly, with the intention of eventually asking for her hand in marriage if she will have me." Thomas was quiet for a long moment, studying Ethan's face. "What do you do for a living, Ethan?" "I am a cowboy, sir. I have worked ranches all over Texas and Colorado for the past 10 years. I am good with horses and cattle. I am honest and I work hard. I do not have much in the way of savings right now, but I am willing to do whatever it takes to provide for Martha. I will find steady work in Del Norte if you will give me the chance." "A cowboy's life is hard and often uncertain," Thomas observed. "My daughter has grown up in relative comfort. She has never wanted for anything." "I know that, sir, and I know I cannot offer her the life she has had, but I can promise to love her with everything I am. I can promise to work myself to the bone to give her a good life. I can promise that she will always come first, no matter what." Ethan's voice was steady and sincere, his eyes never leaving Thomas's. Thomas sighed and looked up at the sky for a moment before returning his gaze to Ethan. "You know, when Martha was a little girl, she used to make up stories about brave knights rescuing princesses. Her mother would read her those fairy tales and Martha would act them out for days afterward. I never thought I would see something like that happen in real life." He paused. "But you did rescue her, did you not? rode in like something out of one of those stories and saved her life. "I just did what anyone would do," Ethan said. "No, you did what a good man would do. And from what Martha has told me in her telegram and in the brief time I have seen you two together, you have made quite an impression on her." Thomas extended his hand again. "You have my permission to court my daughter, Ethan Walsh. But know this, if you hurt her, if you ever give her reason to regret choosing you, you will answer to me." Ethan shook his hand gratefully. "Thank you, sir. I promise you will not regret this." The journey back to Del Norte took 2 days, with Martha, her father, and Ethan traveling together in Thomas's wagon. Ethan rode his gray horse alongside them, and they stopped frequently to allow Martha to rest her still healing leg. The time passed in easy conversation and growing familiarity. Thomas found himself genuinely liking the young cowboy, appreciating his straightforward manner and the obvious care he showed for Martha. Del Norte was a smaller town than Alamosa, nestled in the San Luis Valley with a view of the mountains to the west. The Dalton Mercantile sat on Main Street, a well-maintained building with large windows displaying goods ranging from fabric to farming equipment. Thomas and Martha lived in the apartment above the store, and Thomas immediately offered Ethan the small storage room in back to convert into temporary living quarters. "I could use some help around the store," Thomas said. "The work is not as exciting as cowboying, but it is steady and it pays. If you are serious about courting my daughter, you need to be nearby. The room does not have much in the way of comfort, but it has a bed and a stove." "That is more than generous, sir," Ethan said, meaning it. He had slept in bunkhouses, under the stars, and in a dozen other places far less comfortable than a storage room. Over the following months, Ethan settled into life in Del Norte. He worked in the mercantile, learning the business quickly and proving himself invaluable. His strength made moving heavy inventory easy, and his honest, friendly manner with customers made him popular among the townspeople. But the best part of each day was the time he spent with Martha. They courted in the traditional way, with supervised walks and dinners at the apartment, but they also stole moments alone whenever they could. They would sit on the porch after the store closed, talking about everything and nothing while the sun set behind the mountains. Ethan told her about his dreams of someday owning his own small ranch, a place where he could raise horses and build a real home. Martha shared her own dreams, admitting that she had always wanted to travel, to see places beyond the valley she had grown up in. "We could do both," Ethan said one evening as they sat together on a bench behind the store, Martha's head resting on his shoulder. "Save up enough money, buy some land, build a house, and then take trips to see new places whenever we can afford it." "That sounds perfect," Martha said softly. "A home and adventure both." "Is that a yes?" Ethan asked, pulling back so he could see her face. Martha looked confused. "A yes to what?" Ethan slid off the bench and knelt in front of her, pulling a simple gold band from his pocket. "Martha Dalton, will you marry me? I know we have only been courting for a few months, but I have known since the day I met you that you were meant to be mine. I love you more than I thought it was possible to love anyone. I want to build a life with you, have children with you, grow old with you. Will you be my wife?" Tears streamed down Martha's face as she nodded emphatically. "Yes. Yes, of course yes." She laughed through her tears as Ethan slipped the ring onto her finger and then swept her up in his arms, spinning her around despite her protests that her leg was still weak. He set her down and kissed her deeply, both of them smiling so hard it was difficult to kiss properly. Thomas gave his blessing immediately, having seen over the past months that Ethan was exactly the kind of man he wanted for his daughter. The wedding was planned for October, giving them time to prepare and save money. Ethan worked extra hours, taking on odd jobs around town in addition to his work at the mercantile. He was determined to have enough money to rent a small house for them to start their married life. The wedding took place on a crisp autumn morning in the small church at the edge of town. Martha wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully preserved and altered to fit her. Ethan wore a new suit that Thomas had insisted on buying for him, and he looked both uncomfortable and handsome in the formal attire. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt, attended by townspeople who had come to care for both the mercantile owner's daughter and the cowboy who had saved her life. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Ethan kissed Martha with such tenderness and joy that several women in the congregation dabbed at their eyes with handkerchiefs. The reception was held in the church hall, with food and music and dancing that lasted well into the evening. Ethan proved to be a surprisingly good dancer, guiding Martha through waltzes and reels with easy grace. As the sun set and the party began to wind down, Thomas pulled Ethan aside. "I have something for you," he said, handing him an envelope. "Open it later in private." That night, in the small house Ethan had managed to rent on the outskirts of town, the newlyweds finally had a moment alone. Martha had changed out of her wedding dress into a simple nightgown, and Ethan had removed his jacket and tie, looking far more comfortable. They sat together on the edge of their bed, and Ethan remembered the envelope. Inside was a deed to 10 acres of land west of town, along with a letter. Ethan read aloud, his voice thick with emotion. "Ethan and Martha, this land is my wedding gift to you. It is not much, but it is a start toward that ranch you dream of building. You have proven yourself to be a good man, Ethan, and I am proud to call you my son. Build your home here, build your future, and know that you will always have my support and my love. Thomas." Martha burst into tears, and Ethan held her close, his own eyes damp. "Your father is a remarkable man," he said quietly. "So are you," Martha replied, looking up at him. "I love you, Ethan Walsh. I am so grateful that you found me that day. I am so grateful for every moment since." "I love you too," Ethan said, kissing her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "And I plan to spend the rest of my life showing you just how much." They made love for the first time that night, tender and passionate and full of the deep connection they had forged over the past months. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the darkness, talking quietly about their plans and dreams until they drifted off to sleep. The following spring, they broke ground on their house on Thomas's gift of land. It was a modest structure, but Ethan built it with his own hands, with help from neighbors and friends. By summer, they had moved in, and Martha had planted a garden that was already showing promise. She had also discovered she was pregnant, news that filled both of them with excitement and a little bit of fear. Their first child, a son they named James, was born in February of 1885 during a snowstorm that blanketed the valley in white. Ethan paced the floor of their bedroom while the midwife and Thomas attended to Martha, and when he finally heard the baby's first cry, he nearly collapsed with relief. Martha was exhausted but radiant, holding their son with tears of joy streaming down her face. "He is perfect," she whispered as Ethan sat beside her on the bed, staring in wonder at the tiny life they had created. "Just like his mother," Ethan said, kissing her temple. "You are amazing, Martha Walsh." They settled into the rhythms of family life. Ethan continued to work at the mercantile while also building up their small ranch. He bought a few horses and started breeding them, using skills he had learned over years of working with livestock. Martha helped with the books and the care of the animals when she was not busy with James. Thomas was a devoted grandfather, spending every spare moment with his grandson. 2 years later, Martha gave birth to a daughter they named Rose. She had her mother's auburn hair and her father's gray eyes, and she was welcomed with as much joy as her brother had been. The little house was full of laughter and love, even when money was tight and the work was hard. As the years passed, the ranch grew. Ethan's reputation as a horseman spread throughout the valley, and he began to receive requests for training and breeding services. The income allowed them to expand, to add onto the house, to buy more land. They never became wealthy, but they were comfortable, and more importantly, they were happy. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Ethan took Martha on a trip to Denver, fulfilling her dream of traveling beyond the valley. They left the children with Thomas and spent a week exploring the growing city, attending theater performances and eating in restaurants, and simply enjoying being together without the responsibilities of the ranch. On their last night, they sat in their hotel room overlooking the city lights, and Martha took Ethan's hand. "Do you remember when I asked you what you saw in me?" she said. "That night in Alamosa when you first told me you loved me." "I remember," Ethan replied. "You said you saw a man who risked himself for a stranger, someone kind and brave." "I still see that," Martha said, "but I also see so much more now. I see the father who sits up all night with a sick child. I see the husband who still brings me wildflowers after 10 years of marriage. I see the man who built our home with his own hands and who works himself to exhaustion to give us a good life. I see my partner, my love, my everything." Ethan pulled her close, emotion making his voice rough. "I see the same in you. I see strength and grace and a love that has never wavered. I see the woman who took a chance on a drifting cowboy and made him want to be better. I see the best decision I ever made." They kissed in the lamplight, and Ethan reflected on how a single moment, a chance encounter in the desert, had changed both of their lives so completely. If he had been riding a different trail that day, if he had been even a few minutes later, Martha would have died and he would have continued his aimless wandering. Instead, they had found each other, had built a life together, had created a family and a home. The rattlesnake bite that had nearly killed Martha had instead brought them together, had given them both a second chance at something real and lasting. It was a reminder that fate worked in mysterious ways, that tragedy could transform into blessing, that sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead us to the best. When they returned home to Del Norte, to their children and their ranch and their life together, both of them felt grateful beyond measure. They had faced hardship and uncertainty, but they had faced it together, and that had made all the difference. Years continued to pass, each one bringing new challenges and joys. James grew into a tall, serious boy who loved horses as much as his father did, while Rose was spirited and clever, always asking questions and testing boundaries. They added a third child to their family when Martha gave birth to another son they named Thomas, after her father. The old man's joy at having his namesake was boundless, and he spent even more time at the ranch, teaching his grandchildren and helping with the work. Thomas Dalton passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1896, at the age of 72. His death hit the family hard, but they took comfort in knowing he had lived to see his daughter happy and his grandchildren thriving. They buried him in the Del Norte cemetery next to Martha's mother, and Martha planted roses on the grave because they had been his favorite flower. The ranch continued to prosper through the turn of the century. Ethan and Martha watched as their children grew into adults and started families of their own. James married a local girl and built a house on the edge of the ranch property, continuing the family business of breeding and training horses. Rose surprised everyone by becoming a teacher, like her grandmother had been, and she married a doctor who set up practice in town. Young Thomas followed in his father's footsteps most closely, working the ranch and eventually taking over much of the day-to-day operations as Ethan grew older. Through it all, Ethan and Martha's love never diminished. They still sat together on the porch in the evenings, still held hands when they walked, still looked at each other with the same affection and desire they had felt as newlyweds. They had weathered storms, both literal and figurative, had survived droughts and hard winters and the inevitable struggles of life, but they had done it together. On a warm summer evening in 1913, 30 years after that fateful day in the desert, Ethan and Martha sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. They were in their 50s now, their hair touched with gray, their faces lined with the years. But their hands were still clasped together, their shoulders still touching. "You ever think about that day?" Martha asked quietly. "The day the rattlesnake bit me?" "Sometimes," Ethan admitted. "Mostly I think about how lucky I was to be riding that particular trail at that particular time. How different our lives would have been if I had not found you." "I think about that too," Martha said. "I think about how scared I was, lying there in the dust, thinking I was going to die alone. And then you appeared like something out of a dream. You saved my life, Ethan. You gave me all of this." She gestured at the ranch, at the house they had built together, at the life they had created. "You gave me just as much," Ethan replied. "Before I met you, I was just drifting. I had no home, no real purpose. You gave me a reason to stay in one place. You gave me love and family and a life worth living. You saved me too, Martha. Maybe not from a snake bite, but from loneliness and emptiness." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. Inside the house, they could hear the sounds of their grandchildren playing, visiting for the weekend with their parents. The ranch was full of life and laughter, full of the family they had built together. "I would do it all again," Martha said softly. "Every moment, every hardship, every joy. I would choose you every single time." "So would I," Ethan said, raising her hand to his lips and kissing it gently. "Every single time." As night fell over the valley and the mountains faded into silhouette, Ethan and Martha remained on their porch, content in each other's company. They had lived through 3 decades together, had raised children and built a legacy, had loved each other through good times and bad. The rattlesnake bite that had brought them together was just a scar on Martha's ankle now, barely visible, but the love it had sparked burned as bright as ever. Their story was not one of grand adventure or epic romance in the traditional sense. It was a story of 2 ordinary people who had found each other in extraordinary circumstances and had chosen, every single day, to build a life together. It was a story of hard work and dedication, of compromise and sacrifice, of laughter and tears and the million small moments that made up a marriage. It was, simply put, a love story. The kind that happened in the wild west of southern Colorado in the late 19th century, when a cowboy happened to ride past at just the right moment to save a woman's life. The kind where that single act of courage and compassion blossomed into something deeper and more lasting than either of them could have imagined. The kind of love story that endured, that weathered every storm, that grew stronger with each passing year. The kind that started with a rattlesnake bite miles from any town and ended with 2 people growing old together, surrounded by the family and the life they had built with their own hands and hearts. Ethan and Martha Walsh lived out the rest of their days on that ranch in the San Luis Valley, watching their grandchildren grow and their legacy continue. They never forgot the day they met, the day that changed everything, and they never took for granted the gift they had been given. The gift of finding true love in the most unexpected of circumstances, and the wisdom to nurture and cherish it for a lifetime. When Ethan passed away in 1925 at the age of 68, after a full and rich life, Martha was holding his hand. She followed him 18 months later, and they were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together. Their children and grandchildren gathered to pay their respects, sharing stories of the love that had started with a chance encounter in the desert and had lasted a lifetime. The ranch continued through the generations, a testament to what Ethan and Martha had built. And sometimes, on quiet summer evenings, when the sun set over the mountains in just the right way, those who lived there swore they could feel the presence of the couple who had started it all, still sitting together on the porch, still holding hands, still in love after all these years. It was a story that became family legend, passed down to each new generation. The story of how their great-great-grandmother was bitten by a rattlesnake miles from any town, and how their great-great-grandfather, a cowboy passing through, sucked the venom and rode for help. How that act of bravery and compassion had sparked a love that lasted a lifetime and created a legacy that endured long after they were gone. It was a reminder that love could be found in the most unexpected places, in the most unlikely circumstances. That sometimes the worst moments of our lives set us on the path to the best ones. That fate had a way of bringing the right people together at exactly the right time. And that true love, once found, was worth fighting for, worth building on, worth cherishing every single day. The Wild West was a harsh and unforgiving place, but it was also a land of opportunity and second chances. For Ethan Walsh and Martha Dalton, it was the place where their story began, where they found each other against all odds, and where they built a love that stood the test of time. Their happily ever after was not a fairy tale ending, but something better. A real, lasting, deeply felt love that sustained them through decades of life together, and a family legacy that would continue for generations to come.